Wildcats. We're here in the studio to have a quick conversation with Mr. Monahan about the upcoming election.
Absolutely. So for all the Westminster students who are asking, what should they really expect on election day? I know this is something that a lot of people are talking about being a very monumental election, but what should people really expect, especially from a faculty member who's so involved in the process?
Yeah, it is a weird day, I'm going to be honest. We've lived through over a year's worth of campaigning, but in some ways election day can just seem a little bit different. I'm not going to be there in person at Westminster because I'll be a poll worker, which is its own experience, and if anyone wants to do it someday, it's an amazing life experience. But it exposes you to a lot of humanity. Right. So on election day, most of the campaigning is done. If someone has said or says something really controversial last minute, it might break through in our news feed, but you all have probably experienced this. A lot of us get one version of reality, and this plays into how we interpret election night from our chosen media source. And so a controversial comment may be emphasized for half an hour on one channel and not talked about at all on another channel. Right. And part of the challenge here is they've got 12 hours. They, like the mainstream sort of cable news networks, they've got 12 hours to fill. And they assume that of all the days out of a 4-year period, this might be the day when more of us as Americans, a population of 330 million people, might be open to watching politics or political news. But on election day, sometimes the stories you hear are just kind of bizarre, and they're just looking to fill the time. I don't know if you guys have had that experience in WCAT, but they might say things like, oh, because this Philly or Pittsburgh sports team lost last night, people might be in a bad mood. And is that going to benefit one candidate or the other? It's pure speculation, and there's no way to prove that. There are, however, some times when things get more easily understandable to connect to the outcome. I don't know if you guys have already followed this, it's already happened. In, I think it was Portland, Oregon, there were some ballot drop boxes that someone put explosives into. Wow. And so last night I was looking at pictures in the media where they doused the burning ballots in water to put it out, and then they're looking at addresses to contact people at if their ballot was destroyed enough that they wanted to notify them so they could revote. That is not normal, and for sure that could affect the outcome of an election. So that kind of story, people will probably sit up straight and go oh, where's this happening? Should I, whatever. But the other stuff, whether the Steelers or the Eagles won, I just think that's them trying to fill the news until they get actual results.
Absolutely, yeah.
And how do we make sure that as students, the media and the sources that we're consuming on election day are reliable and are correct?
It's a great question. The media has a really hard job. Sometimes they don't do it so well, but their hard job is the final results aren't decided by the media. They're decided by secretaries of state in each of the 50 states. However, the media is where we all turn. And so they have these incentives to get people to click stories on their web pages or to get people's eyeballs to stay on their channel. They have these incentives to be right, but to be first, right? But this doesn't always break down the way that people assume. If you're a Democrat or a liberal and you think oh, I would never turn to Fox News for election coverage, Fox News's opinion desk is different from what's called its decision desk, and its decision desk has a great reputation for nonpartisan election results interpretation. In fact, in 2020, Fox was the channel that called Arizona for Joe Biden before anybody else did. And there are stories about behind the scenes of the Trump campaign where they were furious at Fox for calling Arizona so early. And the reason they called it early is, you could literally ask Coach Salimi about this, they're running statistical interpretations of the results as they come in. And some counties might come in more quickly because they have smaller populations or other reasons. And if those counties are in a suburban area with a certain percentage of racial demographics or college education levels, and they think that represents a broader trend, they're going to project based on models and mathematical formulas, if this trend keeps up, what will the outcome be? And so there was an interview with the head of Fox's decision desk recently where he was like, well, we looked at Arizona's results and we thought it would be outside of 4 standard deviations if Biden lost this at this point. And I'm sitting there going where's my stats textbook? What does that mean again? But they weren't wrong. It was extremely controversial, but they were not wrong. And they called it Arizona a long time before the state of Arizona was comfortable making that final. And so, Caroline, you and I were talking earlier about what should we expect results on election night? The media will desperately want there to be results, right? But in 2020, it really wasn't until the Saturday after Election Day that the state of Pennsylvania finalized its results. And you could make a reasonable argument that Pennsylvania might be the decisive state again this year. And that's why Fox's decision desk is sort of saying we might have to wait until Saturday. So anyone who's speaking before that, we should maybe take it with a grain of salt and do our own critical thinking, maybe have Fox and MSNBC open next to each other and think about like, oh, are they calling it for this reason? Is it what other sources are telling me, and so on? Because it can be really hard to tell, and it's probably going to take a while.
Yeah, that's awesome. What differences should people expect from this election versus the one in 2020, maybe with voting patterns or maybe the media that they're engaging with, or maybe what we should be doing on campus versus an election that happened in 2020? Because I know we were just in 8th grade by that point.
Yeah.
So it's been a while.
No, I totally get it. And then you got to layer on that 2020 was a unique election for the COVID reason.
Right.
So a lot of states changed their state laws temporarily to allow more mail-in balloting. And so the mail-in balloting rates in 2020 skyrocketed, and they've fallen off a cliff since then. And so that's sort of the main difference that comes to mind. In terms of things you can be doing on campus, if you're a senior and you're registered to vote, do the obvious things, which is to say, you'll see this video after early voting is over probably. And so if you waited until election day to go vote, hopefully you have a free period that day, because some locations can have longer lines, especially before and after work, when the bulk of adults are going to vote. I always tell the story about the fact that my wife was in college in 2004 in a small college town, and they had one machine, and that machine broke. And so they made the national news for having like the longest lines in the country, and it was like a 10-hour line. All right, so hopefully that never happens to any of you all, but plan ahead. Don't expect 10 hours. That never happens. But in early voting, like I voted last night, and I was in and out in 10 minutes. So general life advice going forward is vote early. But on election day, what I'll say is that I hope the experience is great for you. Making conversation with people in line can sometimes be like a little unique opportunity in American life, where you're like, oh, that person's wearing that sweatshirt from that school that my cousin goes to, or that sports team that I like, and you start to culturally figure out like interesting stuff about people. The election day voting process itself just can be pretty intense. The final word I'll say on this is, the rule is, as long as you are in line and don't leave the line before 7 p.m., they have to let you vote no matter how long it takes. So when I'm thinking about high schoolers' schedules, when you think about, let's say you went in the morning before school, but then you had a calc test you didn't want to miss. If the line was too long and you bailed, and you're like, well, I don't have a free today, I can't go in between school and a sports practice, etc. You can probably get there after practice, depending on when your practice or rehearsal or whatever ends. But once you get there, you got to stay in line. Like, you can't go back to your car because you forgot your phone, right? But once you're in line, even if the line's long, once you're in line before 7 p.m., they have to legally let you vote.
Okay.
Mr. Monahan, tell us how you got into this world of politics.
You're saying I'm a little bit nerdy about it. No, you weren't saying that, but it's true. So I think one of the main experiences, like we all have these formative life experiences, like winning a state championship or getting an award in a debate contest or whatever. When I was a freshman in college, America had its closest presidential election. And one of the people living in my dorm that I had become friends with, he and I realized that we had voted for different people. And we were watching the results come in on the same TV. And think about that. We'd known each other for barely a couple months. And thankfully, and this maybe is why I'm so invested in the success of civil dialogue, thankfully, we felt our way through the rest of the night, and that wasn't all-nighter, because I'm referring to the 2000 election in Florida, which took a long time, like way more than one day, for the results to come in. And we kept our eye on learning from each other, but also not losing sight of the fact that we wanted to be able to like play Madden against each other the next day. And we wanted to be able to like hang out and not have the vibes be awkward for the 90% of the year that we had left. And so I think ever since then, I've been committed to this idea that there will be people that we don't understand. But the right impulse is not to demonize them or treat them as someone we can never get along with, but just sort of like do our best to feel our way through election night, because sometimes we will need to ride it out with a coworker or a dorm mate or a family member that we know on some fundamental level we have different values from, or a different vision for our future and America's future from, but they're still a human being and they're still right there in front of us. And to sort of get antagonistic, or we talk about taking winning off the table in civil dialogue, to treat it like, yeah, I won, or my side won and your side lost, it doesn't make any of us like less of a citizen the next morning when we wake up. And so to me, it's always been really important to preserve those relationships. And when you think about you all as a senior class, like you want to have a great experience with college decisions when they come back in. You don't want to be seeing someone as like someone you're resentful or jealous of because of some other reason. You want to be able to like have a great prom. You want to have a great graduation. You don't want to have these resentments. You want to have like wholesome and happy relationships no matter what happened on election night.
Absolutely. I think the topic of civil dialogue, especially in election year, is really important. And I know that especially in a super polarized election and political season in general, how do you think that students should be able to navigate this election cycle, regardless of who wins, and like maintain those relationships as you did with your friend? And maybe what is civil dialogue planning on doing to make sure that we can foster these connections on campus, regardless of who wins?
Sure. I think that there's a huge place for you all to set the tone and the culture on election day. And really, last night I was listening to a podcast, and the hosts are really informed people about all this. And one of them referred to the 8 to 10 week period after election day. And I was like, that's over 2 months. I was like, I am not emotionally prepared for it to take that long.
Yeah.
But you never know. And so I think what I'll say is, there are going to be a group of civil dialogue fellows that go into the middle school and meet with Ms. Thomas's Leadership 101 class and sort of start to spread some best practices. I think for you all as seniors in general, a lot of young people, myself included, will say that the biggest influence on their political opinions are their parents. And that's totally fine and totally normal. Right. You all are at the age, though, where I bet you've gotten in disagreements with your parents about any number of things and started to form your own beliefs and ideas. That's fine, too. I think that processing, again, information from multiple directions, realizing that no matter the outcome, it's not a reflection of your self-worth or your intelligence level or the validity of any values you might have. So encouraging your peers to get excited if their side wins, but be conscious that democracy is a process. And that means it's about more than one day. It's about sort of staying engaged in whatever way you want to. Like I'm thinking about the two of you all. You're incredible public speakers and you're incredibly good listeners. You might find yourself at a party a couple months from now with a friend who just needs that skill set. And so when you think about election night, you might get a text from a friend who is furious or super excited while being around someone who's the opposite. And how do you navigate that? Do you not answer the text and then they end up showing up anyway and then all of a sudden it's an in-person really awkward moment? Or do you ignore the person in front of you and answer the text? Or do you default to like who seems to need your attention more? All these little decisions, trust your sort of moral North Star about what the right thing to do is in the moment for your own emotional health and that of the people around you. And I think you'll be fine.
Absolutely.
Mr. Monahan, one question about the election: who's going to win?
All right, I'm going to try to help with that answer, but bear with me. On election night, the media will focus on some very specific data that they drill down on. Short answer is I don't know. And you all are living through 6 of the last 7 elections have been extremely close. And so anyone who claims that they know for sure right now is exaggerating and predicting the future in a way that they don't know. So what the media will look at is often what are called bellwether counties, where they're counties you get results in from early, often because they're on the East Coast and they live in a state that counts its ballots quickly. I want to pause right here and say that the Constitution gives states a lot of the power to decide the time, place, and manner of their elections. That means, including other things, how they count ballots. And so, for example, some states aren't allowed to open and count absentee ballots until the polls close at 7 p.m. on election day. Others are allowed to open them and start counting a week earlier. And so you can imagine, like with machines, like if you got a week, like you can probably count almost all of them. The reason for that is because they want to either avoid late results and count them early, or if they don't want to count them until the end of election day, they don't want any chance of early results leaking out and then influencing the way people may vote because they know more information than other people do. But if you don't start counting until the end of the night on election day, 5 states have already said that they have no intention of declaring results on election night because of the way that they count. Now, the key here is which counties not are worth more than others, but which counties may have like demographic variables that are really interesting and similar to other counties across the country, often counties that have swung from one side to the other. We live awfully near a couple of them. So Cobb County and Gwinnett County are 2 of the counties that demographically and politically have been changing most rapidly in the entire country. But Georgia can take some time to count its votes. Florida counts its votes very quickly. And so we are likely to hear from Miami and Miami's suburbs quite early in the night. And if Harris, who's not going to win Florida overall, but that is a prediction there, if Harris exceeds expectations in the Miami suburbs, people will probably predict that she'll do better in the suburbs of Milwaukee and Detroit and Phoenix, which are swingier states, and who have similar rates of suburban white college-educated women are seen as a population where Democrats have been gaining recently. Or if Trump does better among Hispanic and Black men in the Miami suburbs, those are populations where Republicans have been gaining recently. And so those will be seen as sort of maybe a variable that you can use to predict things. There are some counties that are kind of fun or interesting to talk about. One of them is Lackawanna County. So for those of you who are fans of the TV show The Office, where The Office is set in Scranton, Pennsylvania, Lackawanna County used to be solidly Democratic. But it does not have a high rate of college graduates. It has a higher rate of working class blue collar voters, which have become increasingly a part of Trump's base. And so really it's a question of what does that county look like as a bellwether for other what are called Rust Belt state counties, so the sort of former industrial Midwest. Other places that I'll be focused on include like Erie, Pennsylvania. Erie also had a paper company, but it went under in the 1980s. Recently, they've had, I think, a hospital, more white-collar jobs. Erie itself went for Trump in 2016, and then 2/3 of the shift to Trump went back to Biden in 2020. And so really no one has any idea what to expect in 2024. In terms of those Miami suburbs, in 2016, Hillary Clinton beat Trump by 29 points there. Biden only beat Trump by 7. Right? But if there was a controversial thing recently, it was this rally that happened in New York City recently, where one of the speakers said something derogatory in a joke about Puerto Rico. And there are 450,000 Puerto Rican Americans who live in the state of Pennsylvania. And there is widespread, after the Bad Bunny endorsement, there's widespread speculation that could swing things because Trump won Pennsylvania by a narrow margin in 2016. Biden won it by an almost equally narrow margin, and we're talking like way less than 450,000 people. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. Okay, I'm gonna pause there for a second. What's your next question?
And you know, this is all really interesting, but I want to hear what's going on besides this presidential election.
Sure. 1/3 of the Senate is up for election every 2 years, and then all of the House of Representatives. There are 435 House races. We don't have that kind of time. So I'm going to dwell on a couple Senate races. You all have lived through an era where people don't tend to split their tickets, meaning they don't tend to vote Republican for one race and Democrat for another. That happens less often than it used to. But when it does happen, it can be really important. For example, there were some people that voted for Brian Kemp for governor, but voted for Raphael Warnock for Senate. They just considered themselves Republicans, but couldn't get behind Herschel Walker. And so in this race, there is a candidate for governor in North Carolina who is historically unpopular because of some very controversial things that he has said. North Carolina has been solidly Republican for a really long time. Theoretically, if the Republican nominee for governor drags down enthusiasm to turn out to vote, Republicans may just decide to stay home, which would subtract votes from Donald Trump too. It's rarer for someone down the ballot to drag down the top of the ticket, but if that happens early on in the night, if Democrats win North Carolina, they're going to get very excited about the overall night because they haven't won it in a really long time. On the flip side, If Republicans hold North Carolina, they will think the Democrats got too excited too early and that they're in fine shape. There is also a Texas Senate race where Ted Cruz is up for re-election. In terms of all the Republicans in the Senate, Ted Cruz might be one of the least popular. And he's running against a former NFL player who, his name is Colin Allred, and the polls there are close. But again, Democrats haven't won statewide races in Texas for quite a while now. The reason those two will be key is right now the Senate is tied 50-50. And there's a Democrat retiring in West Virginia, and everyone thinks that the safest prediction, and I will make that prediction, is that the Republican is going to win that Senate seat in West Virginia, which will mean 51-49. So Democrats will have to pick up one seat just to maintain a tie. But for a Democrat to win in North Carolina, much less Texas, is real rare. Their one path might be through Nebraska. And oddly enough, what's happening there is that there is an independent candidate. Lots of students ask me about like third-party candidates and why there aren't more of them. Well, there's this Republican incumbent in Nebraska who's not been doing super well in the polls. There's an independent running. If you win as an independent, you sort of get to decide who you lean toward. And in a world where Democrats lose that West Virginia race, they're going to turn to the independent in Nebraska if he wins and beg him to side with them, because then they would re-achieve a 50-50 tie, and in the Senate, the vice president breaks ties. And so if Harris won, then Tim Walz would break ties, but you can only do that if you get to 50-50. You can't do it to get to you've got to have 50 in order to break the tie. But again, Democrats counting on Nebraska seems pretty unlikely, based on how it's voted in the past. So those are the three races I sort of got my eye on: North Carolina governor, Texas Senate, and Nebraska Senate.
So, Mr. Monahan, do you have any practices that people should implement to kind of manage the stress of going through the election season, as you just noted that there's so much to be noting on this ballot?
Yeah. Yes. I'm not going to claim to be perfect in this area. The last few months have been super exciting for me to feel like I have like relevant knowledge, but my workout routine has totally been thrown off. The amount of TV I can watch, totally thrown off. I don't sleep as well. All those things would be better if I did that, my equilibrium and my happiness. I will say, like last weekend, I think I went for a run for the first time in like 2 months. I feel terrible about that answer, but it was like the best thing I did all weekend, because there's just that endorphin rush. You can put on a show or whatever, or put in your headphones and just sort of like, breaks are key to our sanity and to our clarity of our thinking. I was reading an interview recently with Fox's Decision Desk guy, and he said the most interesting thing. Basically, he plays the cello on election morning, and I was like, I would imagine that's like a dude who's like nerdily like staring at his phone, or I think Devin can pop up an image right here of Fox headquarters. I mean, it is like 70 screens going simultaneously. Like, no, I don't even know how their human brain knows what to focus on. But that dude wakes up and plays the cello. And I was like, there's something sweet about that. And it's probably something really like, it puts him in a sort of an even keel, not stressed out of his mind thing, because the rest of the day is probably going to be pretty stressful. So know what your cello or your going for a run is. Don't ignore this. Like, we're pretending like, politics doesn't matter. Lots of politics can be really unpopular because it seems so divisive. It is fundamentally necessary and relevant and unavoidable, like these questions of who has power and what do you do with it throughout human history. But it doesn't have to be a reflection of who we are in our sort of core identity. We can be on a continuum of who cares about it more and who cares about it less. And even if you're a politics junkie, which I sort of unapologetically am, it doesn't mean it's good for you or even your clarity of your thinking to do it 24/7, 365. So identify now, like make a plan to take a break on election day from obsessively hitting refresh or sort of talking about it nonstop, because it'll probably be beneficial in the long term, because you will be happier, you'll be a clearer communicator, you won't drive your friends and family crazy with it all. So find your cello or you're going for a run.
And on that topic, Mr. Monahan, I heard that you have an election day routine. Can you take us through a day in the life?
So yes, I will probably always want to be a poll worker. I find it such an amazingly inspiring civic opportunity. I know you're probably about to tune out because that sounds like a ridiculous thing to say, but you get there at 5:30 in the morning and you set up all these machines, you record all these codes, you make sure that everybody sort of trusts the process, and then you get to realize you are the human being who may shape someone's experience of democracy. When we went to vote last night, we brought our kids because we wanted to normalize that for them. And the dude who handed my kid a sticker didn't just sort of hand him a sticker and be like, move along, you're a 9-year-old, you didn't actually vote. He literally leaned over and with a smile on his face said to my kid, like, thank you so much for supporting your parents in them doing the most important thing they can do in our democracy. And I was like, it was just, so for me on election day, I try to be at my nicest and warmest on election day. It really makes me feel better. And there's studies that show that like the more we make others feel better, the more that it makes us feel good. So I get up super early. I try to eat like, not from Brewer Cafe, but I try to eat like a, bacon, egg, and cheese bagel because that's my go-to ideal breakfast. And then you just sort of get after it, greeting voters, trying to be calm and reassuring. The end of the day, I am literally just, hunched over my computer like you can easily imagine, texting with close friends, being, did you hear this? Did you hear this? And then trying to identify a bedtime. I think the average is probably 2 a.m., but I'm not endorsing that approach. And that's mostly because like, that's the point at which I'm like, all right, we're not gonna know tonight. Because like I said, 6 of the last 7 elections have been super close. But going to more than one website, communicating with people from more than one viewpoint, but having a great breakfast, trying to put yourself in as positive a frame of mind as possible. And you can look forward to it all being over. Like I already have planned a sort of a hangout with friends that Friday evening. We'll probably talk about the election and we'll talk about other things because it's been an exhausting, like I'm excited and I'm exhausted. It's been a long 18 months here, so.
And we asked this question earlier, didn't quite get an answer. Who's gonna win?
I was hoping you would notice that. So I'm gonna try to give you a closer answer than I did before. One of the things that we can do is sort of look at the swing states. And these are states that have voted for different parties recently. There are sort of 7 of them this time, if you include North Carolina, which some people don't agree with. Georgia, North Carolina, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Nevada, and Arizona. You'll notice I didn't say Florida. Florida has been Republican for a while now, and it might be the first state to declare its results. And so you'll get this weird combination of life experiences. Trump will probably win Florida by a large margin, and Republicans will go like, awesome, night's off to a great start. That's definitely what happened in 2016, is that Hillary Clinton wildly underperformed in the Miami-Dade area, and that came in early, and Democrats were like, oh, this is not gonna go well. And then you get some northeastern states that include states like New York. New York takes a while to report, but even early on in the night, the media can approach people as they leave the polls to ask them, hi, excuse me, it's totally voluntary, but would you mind telling me who you voted for? Those are what are called exit polls. Or they can even ask people when they're in line before they go vote in what's called an entrance poll. These polls are statistically not always accurate. Sometimes people lie, sometimes people like forget, and that might sound ridiculous, like they just voted 5 minutes ago, but sometimes the results don't always match up with the end of the night results. But exit and entrance polls in New York City will not look at like, did Harris beat Trump in New York City? That seems almost like a foregone conclusion. But compared to previous years, what was her margin of victory? Because if she underperforms Biden or Clinton, real bad sign. If she overperforms, then the media will drill down on like, ooh, there's a large Puerto Rican American community in New York City, so was it that population, in which case you might project further into other states. The swing states will come in more slowly. Georgia is far from the last state to report results, but it's nowhere near as quick as Florida. North Carolina might be the state I have my eye on first because, again, like I said, it's not normally a swing state. It is one of the most rural states. I think it's the 3rd most rural state, which might surprise you because when we go to North Carolina, it's often to go to like UNC Chapel Hill or Duke or whatever. And those college towns and North Carolina's even though it's rural, it's rapidly diversifying and growing. The rapidly growing metro areas and college towns vote overwhelmingly Democratic. And then you might layer onto this, what's the effect of Hurricane Helene? Because some people in rural areas might still be like literally putting their lives back together and may not prioritize going to vote as opposed to like meeting with an insurance adjuster or whatever. So what happens in North Carolina is probably the most open question that interests me. If Harris wins it, real hard to see Trump getting to 270 electoral votes. If Harris loses it, it's not the only path to victory for her, but it will be seen as like, okay, Georgia will probably come in next. Winning Georgia again will be key for Democrats. If she loses North Carolina and Georgia, there's still other paths, but each state that one side loses sort of shrinks the pathway. The polls right now in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania are extremely tight. I mean, effectively within the margin of error, meaning a tie. There will be people that look at, a rally with Michelle Obama or Bruce Springsteen or these culturally really popular figures and try to say like, ooh, Philadelphia turnout was great. Was it because of that? I really am extremely reluctant to make a prediction on any of those 3 states, and it's entirely possible that the election come down to those states. Basically in 2020, 90% of Pennsylvania came in by Thursday, so the media started to call it then, but really you're not talking about it until Saturday. Theoretically, if splits happen, we could be waiting on Arizona and Nevada. Nevada, you can probably guess most of the population lives in the county where Las Vegas is. And the same thing sort of with Arizona and Phoenix. So you might, oddly enough, get the rural, smaller counties reporting the results first because there's fundamentally fewer people that live there. But then that may look, because of the two parties' profiles, more Republican. And so this is what got known in 2022 as the red wave that people expected from those early counties to report. But then it got called the red mirage because when the election day in-person results from big metro counties came in, the red wave crashed and Democratic turnout started to rise. And what's fundamentally maybe my last message here is please use your own critical thinking and talk it through with friends and family members to understand if delays in results are evidence of the system working the way it's supposed to or evidence of the system not working the way it's supposed to. So if it's just state law that they can't count ballots until after the polls close, those ballots are going to take longer to count. And so if it takes days longer, that's not a sign of the system being broken. But if what happened in Portland with the drop box, like literally having explosives in it, if that starts happening on a wider level, that's not the way the system's supposed to work. And so like literally, what if a ballot gets completely burned and they can't tell whose it is? I'm really hoping that doesn't happen on a large scale or at all, obviously. But accusations of fraud or premature victory or premature defeat really should be critically analyzed before we assume that they're true, because there may be just 50 different paces of ballot counting. At the end of the night, all I'm comfortable saying is that right now it is effectively as close an election as I've lived through in terms of the polls, which means like I can easily see it going either way. I think maybe the thing I'm most confident in saying is where we think about a year ago when Joe Biden was going to be the nominee, the polling for Harris has been much, much better than for Biden. And so we're fundamentally in a different race. But the party currently in the White House, in an economy with high inflation, doesn't tend to do well historically. And so on some level, Harris is trying to frame herself as not just Joe Biden's successor, like her own person with new ideas. The outcome of the election may reflect, did she succeed in doing that as she sort of speed dated the country in a very condensed campaign? If Trump wins, people might look at it and be like, well, you know, people got over any feelings they had about him before. They didn't like Harris, and she didn't have enough time to build up her own brand. So I can see it cutting either way, but it's going to be close. Sorry, still didn't answer your question.
That's okay. Well, Mr. Monahan, thank you for joining us in the studio. Definitely got a good insight on this upcoming election.
Thanks, you guys.